It all started when I got assigned to the midnight shift at Moretech Industries, the largest tech company in our city. I worked as an IT support technician, and we rotated shifts to provide 24/7 service. Most nights were quiet, and I didn't mind the extra pay. But the night I found myself alone on the 13th floor, my view of the company changed forever. Moretech was a towering glass and steel structure, modern and sleek, with offices filled with the hum of computers and servers. The 13th floor was the highest, where the senior management offices and archives were located. The floor had been off limits for months due to renovations, and no one was supposed to go up there. But that night, something went wrong with the servers in the building, and all the systems tied to the 13th floor went down. My boss, Marcus, called me at around 11:30 p.m., waking me from the brief nap I'd managed to squeeze in between monitoring tickets. "Jackson, we've got a situation," Marcus said, his voice sounding unusually tense. "We've lost connection to the 13th floor's server racks, and there's no remote fix. You'll need to go up there and check it out." I rubbed my eyes, still groggy, and glanced at the clock. The 13th floor. I thought that place was off limits. "It's just a routine check. Just reboot the system and come back down. Shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. Don't worry, Jackson. You'll be fine," I sighed, knowing I had no choice. I grabbed my equipment, donned my company-issued badge, and took the elevator up. As the doors closed and I watched the numbers climb, a strange sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach. The 13th floor had always been a bit of a mystery. There were stories floating around about things that had happened up there, strange occurrences late at night, whispers in empty offices, but they were just that, stories, or so I thought. When the elevator doors opened, I was greeted by silence. The entire floor was pitch black, the only light coming from the emergency exit sign glowing faintly at the end of the hallway. I stepped out, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam across the room. The 13th floor was much like the rest of the building, modern, with sleek glass walls and chrome finish. But there was something different about it. The air felt heavier, and there was a distinct chill that seemed out of place for a building with climate control. I glanced around looking for the server room, but all the offices were locked, the glass walls opaque, giving no hint of what lay inside. I followed the hallway, feeling a growing sense of unease with every step. Something wasn't right. There was a strange hum in the air, faint but persistent, like a low electrical buzz. But it didn't sound like anything I had heard in the building before. Finally, I found the server room. The door was slightly ajar, the flicker of dim emergency lights illuminating the racks of equipment inside. I hesitated before pushing it open fully, the hinges creaking as the door swung wide. The room was empty, just rows of servers blinking in and out of sync. I knelt down to inspect the system. "Let's just get this over with," I muttered to myself as I reached for the power button to reboot the main server. Just as I did, the lights flickered, plunging the room into complete darkness. My flashlight went out at the same time, leaving me in the pitch-black room. I swore under my breath, fumbling to turn it back on, but the light wouldn't work. I felt a cold draft of air sweep through the room, though there were no windows or vents open. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. I rushed inside, hitting the button for the lobby, my heart pounding in my chest. As the doors began to close, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, an indistinct figure standing in the shadows at the far end of the office. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat, but the doors shut before I could get a better look. I slumped against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. What had I just seen? What were those whispers? The elevator descended slowly, the soft hum of the machinery doing little to calm my nerves. When the doors finally opened, I bolted out into the lobby, the bright lights of the building's entrance a stark contrast to the darkness of the office above. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air hitting me like a slap in the face. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath, before pulling out my phone to call my boss. I didn't care if I sounded crazy, I wasn't going back up there alone. The next day, I told my manager everything. To my surprise, he didn't dismiss my story. Instead, he sighed heavily and gave me a tired look. "You're not the first one to experience something like that," he said quietly. "There have been incidents, especially at night." My blood ran cold as he explained. Apparently, several employees had reported strange occurrences during the night shift: whispers, cold drafts, and the sensation of being watched. Some even claimed to have seen figures in the shadows. Management had tried to keep it quiet, not wanting to cause a panic, but word had gotten around. I wasn't sure what to believe. Part of me wanted to think it was all just some elaborate prank or mass hysteria. But after what I had experienced, I knew there was something more to it. Something in that office wasn't right. I never worked the night shift again after that. In fact, I started looking for a new job not long after. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was haunting that office wasn't finished with me. To this day, I still hear those whispers in my dreams, faint and distant, like a conversation just out of reach. And every time I walk past that building, I can't help but glance up at the 19th floor, wondering if the ghosts of the night shift are still there, waiting for their next victim. The room was empty, the long conference table stretched out before me, its surface gleaming under the dim light. The chairs were all neatly arranged, and there was no sign of anyone. But the whispering continued, growing louder now, like it was surrounding me. My hands trembled as I scanned the room, my flashlight darting from corner to corner. But there was nothing, no one. I was about to turn and leave when something caught my eye. One of the chairs at the far end of the table was slowly spinning, as if someone had just stood up from it. My breath hitched as I stared at the chair, frozen in place. The whispering grew louder still, filling the room with a sense of dread that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang, and the lights flickered out, plunging the room into darkness. My phone's flashlight flickered wildly as I stumbled backward, my pulse racing. The whispering had stopped, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed down on me like a weight. I fumbled for the door, yanking it open and rushing out into the hallway. My footsteps echoed loudly as I sprinted back to my desk, grabbing my bag and jacket. I wasn't going to stick around to find out what was going on. Whatever was in that office, I wanted no part of it. As I made my way to the elevator, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The shadows seemed to shift and move out of the corner of my eye, and every time I glanced back, I thought I saw someone, standing just out of sight. But when I looked directly, there was nothing. The elevator doors finally slid open, and I rushed inside, hitting the button for the ground floor. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of the office. For a brief moment, I saw a figure standing in the shadows near my desk, a tall, indistinct shape that vanished the moment the doors shut. I never returned to that office after that night. I handed in my resignation the following Monday and found another job in a different building, far from the cold, glass walls of that cursed tower. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispering. It haunts my dreams, following me even after I've left that place behind. And every time I pass by that building, I can't help but wonder, what did I see that night? And is it still there, waiting for someone else to stay after hours, alone in the dark? We gathered our things, and Michael reached for the door handle to leave. But when he tried to pull the door open, it wouldn't budge. Locked, he muttered. Confused, he yanked harder, but the door didn't move. David stepped up to help, but even with both of them pulling, the door remained firmly shut. "It's not locked from this side," David said, frowning. "It shouldn't be stuck." We all exchanged nervous glances. This was a high-tech office. None of the doors could be manually locked from inside the room. Everything was controlled electronically. There was no reason for the door to be stuck. "Try the emergency button," Lauren suggested, pointing to the small red button near the door that could override the electronic lock in case of a power outage. Michael pressed it, but nothing happened. The door remained closed. Now even he looked shaken. "Okay," he said, his voice tense. "Let's not panic. I'll call security." He pulled out his phone, but as he dialed, the whispering grew louder. It was no longer a soft murmur but a full-blown conversation, though the words were still unintelligible. The sound filled the room, bouncing off the walls, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. "We're not alone in here," Lauren said, her voice trembling. I glanced at her, feeling the same icy fear settling in my stomach. She was right. There was something in the room with us, something we couldn't see. My heart raced as I tried to steady my breathing. Michael's call went straight to voicemail. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered, his frustration giving way to fear. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and for a brief moment, the whispering stopped. We all stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Then, without warning, the lights went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. Lauren let out a small scream, and I could hear David fumbling for his phone, its flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. "We need to get out of here," Michael said, his voice low but urgent. Now, we all rushed toward the door, trying everything, pulling, pushing, even kicking it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as the whispering returned, louder and more aggressive than before. It sounded as if multiple voices were speaking all at once, their words overlapping in a chaotic chorus that made my skin crawl. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I noticed something moving in the reflection of the glass window. At first, I thought it was just my own reflection, but then I saw it, another figure, standing just behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Lauren nodded, her face white as a sheet. I saw it too. "There's someone in here with us." The whispering grew louder, and now it sounded like it was coming from all directions. Shadows danced on the walls, moving in unnatural ways, and the temperature dropped even further, leaving us shivering in the dark. "We need to find another way out," David said, his voice trembling. Michael, still trying to stay in control, nodded. "Check the windows." We all rushed to the large glass window that overlooked the city, but there was no way to open it. It was solid, unbreakable glass, designed to withstand strong winds and pressure from the outside. We were trapped. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the whispering turned into a loud, guttural moan, and the room seemed to vibrate with a strange energy. The glass walls around us began to rattle, and the shadows on the walls grew darker, more defined. Then, we heard it, a loud bang, followed by a deep, throaty laugh that echoed through the room. "What the hell is that?" Lauren screamed, backing away from the window. I didn't know. None of us did. Suddenly, the hum I'd heard earlier grew louder, morphing into a low, unsettling vibration. And then I heard it a faint whisper, barely audible, but enough to freeze me in place. "Jackson." I spun around, heart pounding in my chest. The voice sounded distant but unmistakable, like it was coming from the hallway. I grabbed my flashlight, which finally flickered back to life, and hurried to the door, peeking out into the hallway. It was empty, the emergency lights casting long, ominous shadows across the floor. I knew I hadn't imagined it. Someone had called my name. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe it was one of the janitors or another employee, but it didn't make sense. I was supposed to be the only one on this floor. Still, I couldn't just stand there. I needed to finish the job and get out. I quickly rebooted the server, my hands shaking slightly, and stood up to leave. But as I stepped into the hallway, the elevator at the far end dinged, the doors sliding open. I stopped in my tracks. The building was empty, there was no one else here. But someone, or something, had just called the elevator. I aimed my flashlight at the open doors, but no one stepped out. The elevator stood there, open and waiting. My pulse quickened, and I debated whether I should just take the stairs down, but the staircase was all the way on the other side of the building. I took a hesitant step toward the elevator when I heard the whisper again. "Jackson." This time, it was right behind me. I spun around, my flashlight illuminating nothing but the empty hallway. My breath caught in my throat. The cold draft returned, this time stronger, almost as if something was passing by me. I felt a presence, something unseen but undeniably there. The whisper grew louder, a chorus of voices now, all saying my name over and over, as if beckoning me to follow. I bolted. I ran down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the silence, but no matter how fast I went, the whispers seemed to follow, growing louder and more insistent. I reached the elevator and jammed the button, praying for it to close. The doors slid shut, and I slumped against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The voices stopped as suddenly as they had started, leaving me in heavy, suffocating silence. I rode the elevator down to the ground floor, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. As soon as the doors opened, I ran out into the lobby, not stopping until I was outside in the crisp night air. I didn't go back to the 13th floor that night, and the next morning, I handed in my resignation. Whatever was up there, whatever those whispers were, I wanted nothing to do with it. Weeks later, I learned that the 13th floor had been shut down for a reason. Years ago, there had been an accident, an electrical fire in the server room that claimed the lives of 2 employees. The building had been renovated since, but some say the spirits of those who died never left. They linger in the forgotten corners of the floor, whispering, waiting for someone to hear them. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I know what I heard that night. And I'll never set foot in that building again. Not after the midnight shift files found me. The lights flickered back on, but the atmosphere in the room remained tense. The whispering had stopped, but the sense of dread lingered, hanging over us like a dark cloud. We all stood there, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then, slowly, the door creaked open, as if on its own. We didn't waste any time. We rushed out of the conference room and into the hallway, not stopping until we reached the elevator. None of us spoke on the way down to the lobby. We didn't need to. We all knew something unexplainable had happened in that room, something that defied logic and reason. The next morning, I handed in my resignation. I wasn't going to stick around to find out what else might happen. Whatever was in that conference room, I wanted no part of it. But even now, weeks later, I still hear the whispering in my dreams. It follows me, haunting me with the memory of that night. I don't know what we encountered in that office, but I know one thing for sure: I'll never work late in a corporate building again. Working at a large law firm, the hours are brutal. I had just passed my second anniversary at the firm, and I was still one of the junior associates trying to make a name for myself. The pressure to bill more hours, get noticed by the partners, and make it through the never-ending workload was suffocating. So, when I was assigned a major case, I knew I had no choice but to pull late nights, even if that meant being the last one in the office. It was a Friday evening, and the office was deserted. Most people had gone home by 7 p.m., and I was one of the few left in the building. My desk was on the 17th floor, tucked in a corner cubicle with a panoramic view of the city skyline. At night, the city lights reflected off the floor, two ceiling windows, creating an oddly beautiful but isolating atmosphere. I wasn't completely alone, though. I knew the cleaning crew usually came around 10 p.m., and sometimes security would make their rounds. That thought gave me some comfort as I stared at the pile of case files in front of me. I had to review deposition transcripts and prepare arguments for a Monday morning meeting, and I wasn't even close to finishing. Around 9:30 p.m., I heard the distant hum of the elevator doors opening down the hall. I assumed it was the cleaning crew starting their rounds. I didn't pay much attention to it and kept working, fully engrossed in the legal documents. A few minutes later, I heard soft footsteps echoing through the hallway. The building had an eerie stillness at night, so every sound seemed amplified. The footsteps stopped near my cubicle, and I glanced up, expecting to see one of the janitors, but there was no one there. I shook my head, dismissing it as my imagination. Maybe the sound had come from farther down the hallway, and I had just misjudged its proximity. I went back to work, trying to focus on the client notes, but something felt off. The air had grown colder, and a strange sense of unease settled over me. I tried to push the feeling aside and continued typing on my laptop. The office was always chilly at night, especially with the AC running, but this was different. It felt as if the temperature had dropped suddenly, like an icy wind was sweeping through the room. I stood up and walked over to the thermostat near the entrance of the office. I checked the settings, but everything seemed normal. The thermostat was set to a comfortable 72 degrees. As I turned to walk back to my desk, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A figure, standing at the far end of the hallway, just beyond the glow of the emergency exit light. It was too dark to make out any details, but the silhouette was unmistakable. Someone was standing there, watching me. I froze, my heart racing. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling slightly. The figure didn't move, didn't respond, It just stood there, motionless. I took a hesitant step forward, squinting to see if it was one of the cleaning crew. But as I moved closer, the figure seemed to dissolve into the shadows. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. My mind was racing. Had I imagined it? Was it a trick of the light? I walked down the hallway to where I had seen the figure, but there was nothing there, just the empty corridor stretching into darkness. The offices were locked, and no one else should have been on the floor. It had been a few months since I started working for a high-end marketing agency in the heart of the city. The office was a sprawling maze of glass walls, conference rooms, and open workstations, each meticulously designed to fit the company's polished aesthetic. The first few weeks were overwhelming, adjusting to the fast-paced environment and juggling multiple clients. But the company perks were impressive. Fancy coffee machines, state-of-the-art technology, and best of all, the office was located on the 40th floor, providing a breathtaking view of the skyline. Everything seemed perfect, at least until we were assigned to work on a major client project. The deadlines were tight, and our small team had no choice but to pull late hours in the office. My colleagues, Michael, Lauren, and David, were in the same boat, working overtime every evening to make sure everything was in order. It was exhausting, but we were committed to delivering the best. The turning point came one evening. Just after 9 p.m. we had all gathered in one of the larger conference rooms for a final review before presenting to the client the next morning. It was a sleek room, with a massive oak table dominating the space, surrounded by 10 high-backed leather chairs. At the far end of the room was a large floor-to-ceiling glass window, offering a panoramic view of the city. The soft, ambient lighting from the skyscrapers below painted the room in a calm, warm glow, and at first, it seemed like any other late-night session. But the strange atmosphere that followed was something none of us could have predicted. It started when Michael, our project lead, noticed something odd on the conference room's digital whiteboard. We were going over some campaign strategies when the screen flickered, the lights above dimming momentarily. We all paused, exchanging confused glances, but when everything returned to normal, we assumed it was just a glitch. "Guess the system's tired too," Lauren joked, forcing a laugh. I nodded, though something in the room felt off. The temperature seemed to drop slightly, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me, trying to shake off the sudden chill. Michael pressed on, going over the rest of the presentation slides, but I noticed that his usual confidence had waned. He kept glancing toward the glass window, as if expecting to see something there. It wasn't long before we all started to feel the shift. The air in the room felt heavier, like something oppressive was settling over us. A strange, low hum filled the space, not loud enough to be alarming, but just persistent enough to be unnerving. At first, I thought it was coming from the building's system, but then David, who was sitting closest to the window, mentioned it. "Do you guys hear that?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. He glanced around the room, waiting for someone to confirm he wasn't losing it. Lauren and I exchanged uneasy looks, but I nodded. "Yeah, I've been hearing it too. Like a low hum or something." Michael frowned, clearly irritated. "It's just the air conditioning," he said, though I could hear the edge in his voice. David shook his head. "No, it's something else. Listen." We all went quiet, and that's when we heard it. A faint whispering sound, almost imperceptible at first, but growing clearer by the second. It was like a low murmur, as if someone was speaking just beyond the glass wall, but no words were discernible. I turned toward the window, half expecting to see someone standing outside, but there was no one there. Just the empty cityscape, stretching out into the night. "That's not the AC," Lauren whispered, her face pale. Michael stood up, clearly unnerved, but trying to maintain control. "All right, let's wrap this up. We've been here too long." He was right. We had been pushing ourselves hard, and exhaustion was setting in. But something about that whispering unsettled me. It was a cold December night, the kind that made your breath hang in the air like a cloud. I had just settled into my desk for yet another late night shift. Being the junior on the team meant that I was the one stuck with the graveyard hours, trying to catch up on endless tasks while the rest of the office basked in their warm homes. Our company's office was on the 19th floor of a sleek, modern corporate tower, surrounded by steel and glass, high above the city. It felt more like a fortress in the sky than a place of work. As usual, the office was completely empty, the faint hum of computers and the occasional creak of the building my only companions. I wasn't sure why, but the place always felt different at night. It was the same space I spent 8 hours a day, yet the quiet and the darkness transformed it into something unsettling. The bright fluorescent lights, usually harsh and unforgiving, now flickered sporadically, casting long shadows across the rows of empty desks. I shivered slightly, not just from the cold, but from the eerie sensation of being watched. It was the same feeling I had felt the past few nights, but I had brushed it off as just paranoia. After all, I was alone. There couldn't possibly be anyone here. I tried to focus on the report I was working on, but the feeling persisted, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered again, this time more violently, plunging the office into a brief moment of darkness. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, staring at my computer screen, which was now the only source of light in the room. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to grow louder, filling the silence with an unnerving drone. I let out a shaky breath, convincing myself it was just a power surge. But then, I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. My stomach tightened as I slowly turned my head, scanning the empty office. At first, I thought it was just the sound of the wind outside, but the whispers grew louder, closer, like someone was standing just behind me, speaking in low, hurried tones. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, the sound cutting through the silence like a knife. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice shaking slightly. There was no response, just the echo of my voice bouncing off the walls. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves. The logical part of my brain told me it was just my imagination, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Forcing myself to sit back down, I tried to ignore the uneasy sensation creeping up my spine. I opened my email, determined to distract myself with work, but the whispers returned, clearer this time. They were faint, almost like a distant conversation, but I couldn't make out the words. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced around the office again, my eyes darting between the rows of cubicles. Then I saw it, movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned sharply, staring at the far end of the office, but there was nothing there, just rows of empty desks, bathed in the dim glow of the emergency lights. But I was sure I had seen something, or someone. I stood up again, this time more cautiously, and made my way toward the back of the office. My footsteps echoed loudly in the silence, each one sending a jolt of fear through me. As I reached the break room, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the light switch. I flipped it, but the room remained dark. The light bulb was out. Desperate, I turned and headed for the stairwell. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside, but the moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. The stairwell was pitch black, the lights flickering on and off sporadically. I raced down the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the narrow space. The whispering followed me, growing louder and more frantic with each step. I could feel something chasing me, something unseen but undeniably present. I didn't stop until I reached the lobby, gasping for breath as I burst through the exit. The security guard at the front desk gave me a strange look as I stumbled into the lobby, disheveled and out of breath. "You all right?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. I didn't know how to answer. I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to explain what had just happened. How could I? It sounded insane. I never worked late at the office again after that night. I made sure to leave before sunset, no matter how much work I had. And every time I walked past that darkened hallway, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see that shadowy figure standing there, watching. To this day, I don't know what I encountered in that office. Was it a ghost, a hallucination, or something else entirely? All I know is that whatever it wasn't friendly. It was something dark, something malevolent, and I have no desire to ever find out what it wanted. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the darkness, my phone flashlight guiding my way. The room was cold, colder than the rest of the office, and the shadows seemed to move unnaturally, twisting and writhing in the corners. I scanned the room, my heart racing, but it was empty. That's when I heard it, a loud, crashing sound from behind me. I spun around, nearly dropping my phone, and rushed back to the main office. My desk was in shambles, papers scattered everywhere, and my chair was tipped over. My computer screen flickered, the faint light casting a ghostly glow across the room. I stood frozen in place, my mind racing with confusion and fear. There was no one else in the building. There couldn't be. But then I heard it again, the whispers, louder this time, more frantic. They seemed to be coming from all round me, closing in. Panicking, I grabbed my bag and bolted for the elevator. My hands shook as I hit the button, glancing nervously over my shoulder. The whispers were growing louder, more distinct. I could hear voices now, multiple voices, speaking in hushed, hurried tones, but I still couldn't make out the words. It was just another day at the office, or at least that's how it began. I worked for a mid-sized tech company in downtown Seattle, nestled in a sleek skyscraper with floor-to-ceiling glass windows that provided a view of the bustling city below. It was the kind of office that seemed so modern and efficient, open plan, lots of natural light, and pristine white walls. Nothing about it screamed haunted or even strange, but things changed the day I started staying late for overtime. It began about a month ago. I had fallen behind on my work and volunteered to stay after hours to catch up. The office was always lively during the day, with constant chatter and the sound of fingers tapping on keyboards. But at night, it was a different place entirely. The only sound that filled the silence was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional ding of the elevator far down the hallway. The sleek, modern office that felt so inviting in the daylight suddenly felt cold and sterile after dark. My desk was tucked away in a corner near one of the large glass walls that overlooked the city. At night, the view became a reflective black mirror, showing only the inside of the office, with the occasional flicker of car lights far below. I had spent a few nights there before without anything strange happening, so I never expected the office to feel different. But that particular Friday evening, something about the atmosphere felt off. It started small. The first strange occurrence was around 10 p.m., long after everyone else had gone home. I was reviewing some client data when I heard a soft thud from across the room. I glanced up, expecting to see someone from the cleaning crew, but there was no one there. The open plan office stretched out before me, completely empty except for the rows of desks and chairs bathed in the soft glow of the emergency lights. I shrugged it off. It was an old building. Noises were bound to happen. But then I heard it again this time. The sound was closer, like someone tapping on the glass wall behind me. Slowly, I turned around to face the window, but all I saw was my own reflection staring back at me. Beyond that, there was nothing but the dark expanse of the city. The tapping continued, faint but persistent. I stood up and walked over to the window, pressing my hands against the cool glass, trying to peer through the reflection. That's when I saw it, a shadow, faint and indistinct, standing just behind me. My breath caught in my throat as I spun around, but the office was empty. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the empty room, convinced that someone had been standing there just moments ago. But there was no one, just the rows of empty desks, their chairs pushed neatly under them. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as a trick of the light. But the nagging feeling of unease remained, crawling under my skin like a persistent itch. I sat back down at my desk, trying to focus on my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I glanced up, I half expected to see someone standing there, just out of sight. But there was never anyone there. The office was empty, except for me. The clock ticked closer to midnight, and I was almost done with my work when I heard the sound again, this time a soft, distant whisper. My blood ran cold as I strained to listen, but the words were too faint to make out. It was like someone was talking in the next room, just beyond the glass partition. But I knew there was no one else in the office. I stood up, grabbing my phone and flashlight, and made my way toward the back of the office where the sound seemed to be coming from. My footsteps echoed loudly in the silence as I passed row after row of empty desks. The whispering grew louder, but still, I couldn't make out the words. When I reached the back of the office, I found myself standing in front of the conference room, its glass walls reflecting the faint light from the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and the whispering seemed to be coming from inside. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, before slowly pushing the door open. It wasn't just fatigue, it was something else, something more sinister. We gathered our things, and Michael reached for the door handle to leave. But when he tried to pull the door open, it wouldn't budge. Locked, he muttered. Confused, he yanked harder, but the door didn't move. David stepped up to help, but even with both of them pulling, the door remained firmly shut. "It's not locked from this side," David said, frowning. "It shouldn't be stuck." We all exchanged nervous glances. This was a high-tech office. None of the doors could be manually locked from inside the room. Everything was controlled electronically. There was no reason for the door to be stuck. "Try the emergency button," Lauren suggested, pointing to the small red button near the door that could override the electronic lock in case of a power outage. Michael pressed it, but nothing happened. The door remained closed. Now even he looked shaken. "Okay," he said, his voice tense. "Let's not panic. I'll call security." He pulled out his phone, but as he dialed, the whispering grew louder. It was no longer a soft murmur but a full-blown conversation, though the words were still unintelligible. The sound filled the room, bouncing off the walls, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. "We're not alone in here," Lauren said, her voice trembling. I glanced at her, feeling the same icy fear settling in my stomach. She was right. There was something in the room with us, something we couldn't see. My heart raced as I tried to steady my breathing. Michael's call went straight to voicemail. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered, his frustration giving way to fear. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and for a brief moment, the whispering stopped. We all stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Then, without warning, the lights went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. Lauren let out a small scream, and I could hear David fumbling for his phone, its flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. "We need to get out of here," Michael said, his voice low but urgent. Now, we all rushed toward the door, trying everything, pulling, pushing, even kicking it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as the whispering returned, louder and more aggressive than before. It sounded as if multiple voices were speaking all at once, their words overlapping in a chaotic chorus that made my skin crawl. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I noticed something moving in the reflection of the glass window. At first, I thought it was just my own reflection, but then I saw it, another figure, standing just behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Lauren nodded, her face white as a sheet. I saw it too. "There's someone in here with us." The whispering grew louder, and now it sounded like it was coming from all directions. Shadows danced on the walls, moving in unnatural ways, and the temperature dropped even further, leaving us shivering in the dark. "We need to find another way out," David said, his voice trembling. Michael, still trying to stay in control, nodded. "Check the windows." We all rushed to the large glass window that overlooked the city, but there was no way to open it. It was solid, unbreakable glass, designed to withstand strong winds and pressure from the outside. We were trapped. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the whispering turned into a loud, guttural moan, and the room seemed to vibrate with a strange energy. The glass walls around us began to rattle, and the shadows on the walls grew darker, more defined. Then, we heard it, a loud bang, followed by a deep, throaty laugh that echoed through the room. "What the hell is that?" Lauren screamed, backing away from the window. I didn't know. None of us did.